Welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about supporting the mental health needs of your employees. This is Catherine McCary of Disability in DC Metro. We are part of the Disability in family and are thrilled to have you join us today. If you have any questions, please send them to me or to Ryan Walters, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But Ryan, if you just go to the next slide real quickly. So before we start, we wanted to make sure that closed captioning is available for today and directions on how to do that. You will see at the bottom of your screen a closed caption button, and you can choose to show subtitles. If you would rather see the captions as a running script, please choose View Full Transcripts. And if you'd like to view the closed captioning outside of the Zoom frame, navigate to the following link. To change the font and size of your closed captioning, please navigate the arrow next to the closed caption button and select Subtitle Settings. If you have any questions on this, please reach out to Ryan Walters. It's rywalters@deloitte.com. And we will go ahead. I'd like to welcome you to the Disability in DC Metro's event focused on National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I am the CEO and Executive Director of this chapter and also the President of C5 Consulting. I'm going to the next slide real quickly to tell you about the Disability in chapter, and then we'll do the agenda and turn it over to our speakers. So thank you. Our motto, our mission is building the business network for disability inclusion. If you're familiar with Disability In, you probably know a lot about the chapters, but we are very focused on engaging employers through education and resources, and with the focus goal of changing attitudinal and organizational barriers. If you are in the local DC metro area, we invite you to join us and be a member, but we are offering this to everyone across the country. So if you're interested in our upcoming events, please sign up for our newsletter, and then you'll know not only what we're doing in DC, but also the disability events that are going on around the world. Next slide. And there we go. So Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you walk us through the agenda.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Catherine, and welcome to everybody. My name is Ryan Walters. I'm a senior consultant at the firm, and outside of my client responsibilities, I support our GPS and federal health and powered well-being teams, our veterans physical health and well-being team, and our Ability First business resource group. As an extension of my work with our Ability First team, I sit on Disability in DC's board of directors, who, as Catherine said, is co-hosting this event with us today. We're now going to move into a keynote and a panel discussion. So our keynote will be delivered by Amy Smith, who is Deloitte's National Diversity Leader and a Managing Director at our firm. We then have three individuals who will be hosting a panel for us today. Dan Pelton from Deloitte is a clinical psychologist and advises our GPS practice on mental health. Melanie Wetzel from the JAMA Combination Network is Jan's lead consultant on their cognitive and neurological team. And then Lou Orsleen from the Office of Disability Employment Policy under the Department of Labor is also with us. Lou is a director for their employer and workplace policy team. So with that, I want to turn the meeting over to Amy Smith for our keynote introduction.
Hi, well, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much, Catherine and Ryan, for having us here. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Amy Smith, and I am local to the DC area, and I actually just started a new job. So Ryan introduced me as the National Diversity Leader, which is true, but only for the last 2 weeks. So still working to find my way there. But previous to that, I was our talent and inclusion leader for our government and public services practice, which is a national practice, but has, I don't want to say the majority, but really the majority of folks in the greater Washington area serving the federal government. So very excited. The other thing I wanted to share kind of off the bat is one of the things that's really important to us at Deloitte is being our authentic selves and embracing all the facets of our identity. And this group captures, and this group in this meeting, I think captures two of the big parts of my identity. So the first one is that I will share that I suffer from anxiety and depression, and it is not something I knew until I was in my 30s, which I think is a significant data point, because, you know, I lived for 30 years without understanding that about myself, which I think made things harder than they needed to be. And so I'm a big fan of destigmatizing the idea of getting access to mental health and trying to take care of your mental health just as you would your physical health. The other part of my identity that I'll share is that I was born with spina bifida. So I am a disabled person, and, you know, am personally fascinated how maybe one part of the identity impacted the other or vice versa, but that's probably a conversation for another day. So excited to be here and share with you all how Deloitte has been evolving over the years and what supports we're putting in place, particularly from a mental health perspective. Okay, so I think what's important to recognize is that Deloitte prioritized well-being and inclusion kind of early on in our journey as a firm. I don't know how familiar everybody is with Deloitte, but we're kind of like, of the big four of the consulting firms, I think we're like the huggy ones. People feel like we are approachable, that we do a lot around change management. It's part of our culture that we're very inclusive. We have this work-life balance, blah, blah, blah. I think, you know, the individual experience for everyone is different, but I feel like that's part of our reputation. So early on, you know, even as far back into the 80s and 90s, Deloitte kind of looked at inclusion as a necessity and started the conversation around women in the workplace. And has evolved kind of over the years, over the decades, to where we are now, where we focus on inclusion, we focus on well-being, which originally started out as physical health, now has evolved to include mental health. And with my new job, we've realized that now we also need to maybe re-energize our focus on diversity and bring equity into that conversation as well. So I share all that just because I don't think there's any sort of like mission accomplished banner that we want to put up for Deloitte. I think we are on a constant journey, and where we are today won't be where we are next year, but happy to talk about where we are today. So mental health at Deloitte. It, I think, started off a lot about stress management, which is good, right? Everybody has stress that we deal with, and now has kind of evolved into more specific topics, like how do we be more resilient? And I don't know, Dan and I know each other pretty well. He might share a little bit about that conversation inside of the firm. But, you know, we recognize that all of us probably hold a different meaning for well-being, and that it's unique. But the one thing that we all can agree on is that it's a critical component of our lives. So we want to care for our mental and physical health, and we want to make sure that people are empowered to prioritize that. So when we talk about prioritizing it, we've made it part of our talent strategy to put that focus on well-being and create an environment where all of our practitioners can thrive. We also have it in our strategy that, like, taking care of each other and making well-being is a shared value. We talk a lot about our values at Deloitte. So well-being is just shared value. And we fundamentally believe that because of the way our business works, that the well-being of our people is also the well-being of Deloitte. So I think when you're talking about how to create a movement in an organization, it's important that it's embraced as part of your core principles, core values. And I would say that from a discussion standpoint, we're there. I mean, we can acknowledge that everybody's individual talent experience is a little bit different and everybody is learning how to advocate for themselves and set boundaries. But at a fundamental level, it is encouraged for folks to take care of their well-being at Deloitte. We actually have a chief well-being officer. She's one of my colleagues. We work together. Her name is Jen Fisher. She's a great follow on LinkedIn. She's always posting. She does a lot of work with Thrive Global. So there's tips and tricks out there from Jen that are applicable to all people, not just people at Deloitte. And her role is to give our people support and flexibility so that every day folks can make choices that enable them to be energized and confident and aware. And she also beats the drum about mental health is physical health, and that if we're only talking about our physical health, we're not treating the whole person. And so, you know, it is not unusual for us to have conversations broadly with our practitioners about, you know, like I've said, mental health, financial health, social aspects, and how to bring all sorts of different resources together to personalize experiences for our practitioners. Okay, it's weird because this isn't interactive, right? I'm not used to doing keynote speeches, so I'll keep going. So from a tools perspective, we like to say that our well-being tools are comprehensive. It includes things like learning and benefits. One example of a well-being benefit that everybody at the firm really loves is that we have a $500 well-being subsidy, and it's used for all manner of things. And they actually keep expanding it. They've expanded it a lot since COVID happened, actually. But you can use it to buy, you know, to pay for your gym membership. You can use it to buy exercise equipment. You can also use it for things that insurance doesn't cover. So some people want to go seek chiropractic care. You can use your well-being subsidy for that. And you can use it for things like massages or other things that I think would fall more on the mental health side. Another one of our benefits is that we also have access to mental health professionals. We have an employee assistance network, and it's also in the process of evolving quite a bit. So, you know, 2020 has been a super interesting year, and I'll just kind of share the journey that our government and public services practice has gone on, because I think it's like a snapshot of where we are, like more broadly in terms of mental health. So, you know, January was fine, whatever. We all came into work and we experienced, what do we call it, the winter blues. And we were unsuspecting of what the rest of 2020 would hold. Well, in February, we actually had a beloved leader in our practice die very tragically. And that was kind of the first thing that happened in 2020 that brought the mental health conversation further than it had ever been before at the firm. So, you know, we had always talked about mental health from an individual standpoint, and how do you manage it for yourself, and how do you understand that there is no stigma to telling somebody, like, look, I'm going to block every Tuesday at 4 on my calendar because I'm going to go to see my therapist. I mean, you don't have to tell people, but there's nothing wrong with sharing with somebody that that's a hard boundary that you have. So we had been talking about it in those terms, but we had never talked about it in terms of a practice. Like, how do we all collectively grieve together? And what does it do to our collective mental health to go through something like this? And so one of the things that kind of brought to light was when you have, I don't know, hundreds of people seeking mental health resources at the same time, you start to see some of the opportunities to improve your employee assistance network. And so one of the things we realized is that we didn't have a quick way to react in a crisis. So obviously we bring in grief counselors for crisis care, like we have resources like that we can bring together. But what we couldn't do for an individual, like the best we could say to them was, one, you can make an appointment to talk to the grief counselors who were there for a finite amount of time, or you could call the EAP. And I think employee assistance programs are pretty common. And I think they all work similarly in that you call an 800 number, you talk to someone who will call a concierge, and they try to help you find a provider that meets your qualification or your requirements. Well, when you have people who are in crisis, you don't want them to have to go through like a phone tree of 100 different options and like have to call 6 therapists. And I know like therapists will say that's part of doing the work, and I agree with that, except for when we're in a crisis situation. And so what we realized is that we needed maybe something in front of the EAP for when things were like at a peak, we were able to have faster access to resources. And so now Jen Fisher, our Chief Wellbeing Officer, is working with folks like Dan and other clinicians in our practice to figure out what does that look like? What would it look like if we had clinicians on staff at Deloitte that practitioners would have access to almost immediately, which is like a very different way of thinking about it. And so we're working through that right now. It's far from being implemented. Okay, so we had this event in our practice. Then we had COVID-19 happen, where all of us were at like work on a Friday, and then over the weekend, our offices shut down and are still shut down. So that was like in March. And I think that happened maybe a week and a half after the funeral that we had all just attended. So then COVID happened, and COVID was kind of, it was weird at first and we didn't know where it was going, but as it continued to wear on and as school districts continued to make decisions, and I do think like the schools were really driving a lot of this, what we saw was an increase in need for caregivers and parents for mental health. And how do I balance an intense job like at Deloitte, but also teach my kids and be a caregiver to my kids and all of these things, and daycares were closed, like all of the structure that we had all worked so very hard to put in place to enable us to be productive members of the Deloitte family was like crashing around us. And so Deloitte had to make some, and I keep saying Deloitte, it sounds weird now. So we had to make some decisions about, okay, we had backup care benefits, which I think do a lot for mental health. I also have children, so it makes me feel better to know that there's something I can go to if my normal care situation isn't available. So we had that. But as time wore on, those benefits wore out for people. And we had to look at, okay, how do we very quickly revamp our benefits for caregivers, and not just for parents, but also, what if you are a caregiver for an older relative and all of a sudden the person who had been helping you manage that doesn't feel safe coming in anymore? Like, what do you do then? And how do we extend those benefits? So that started a conversation around that. And we were able to make some fast changes where we extended that. And then, the CARES Act helped with kind of setting some guidelines for that too. And then I'll just say the last thing that happened was what I will call the social justice movement conversation being elevated to where it is today. And, our practitioners were no exception to that. Like, we had people who were very impacted and were now grieving the death of a leader, grieving whatever you want to call COVID, grieving, watching the deaths of people on TV, and how do we process that? And again, like, because our people are our assets, like, what are we doing to take care of that? So 2020 became this like storm of mental health events that we had to tackle. And I will say, in terms of the last one I mentioned around racial justice, Jen Fisher, again, with help from folks like Dan and some of his colleagues, decided to ask the question, what if we took a racial trauma view to some of our mental health, and have been piloting care in that way? So not only are we now bringing some of the response into the firm and using our own clinicians, but can we actually have structured programs around healing for racial trauma, and how do our people process the impacts of things that are happening outside and reconcile them with Deloitte's stance on different issues? And so I would say that the last, what are we in October? The last 10 months have been a real test for what we provide at Deloitte in terms of benefits around mental health. And then I guess I'll just leave you with, like, it's not something that we're going to step away from. I think our conversation will only continue to intensify. I mean, now, like, we have practitioners talking about like the mental impact of the election and all the conversations going on around that. And I don't think you can ignore it. And so, you know, the more the tension rises outside of Deloitte, the more it's going to rise inside of Deloitte. And then when you layer on kind of Deloitte specific things, it's just, we can't ignore it. Like, we just literally can't ignore it. We can't afford to lose people. And so I'm proud to work somewhere where we're willing to have a conversation and make fast changes to support our practitioners. So Ryan, I'll stop there because I've lost track of what my time is, but hopefully that was helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy. So with that, we are going to transition over to our panel now. So as I mentioned before, we have 3 individuals from across different domains, which includes Deloitte, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and then the Job Accommodation Network. So with that, I will shift over to our panel, and Amy will be leading our panel today, and everybody will be providing perspective on different issues across the mental health conversation now. So Amy, over to you.
All right. So Lou, Melanie, Dan, hello. Nice to meet you in this virtual world. Why don't we just do real quick? I know Ryan introed you, but maybe just like 1 to 2 minutes on your own, how you describe yourself, and then we can jump into the questions. So Melanie, maybe we start with you and then go Lou, Dan after that.
Okay. Hi, it's great to be here. My name is Melanie Wetzel. I'm the lead consultant on the cognitive neurological team, which handles all things cognitive and neurological. That would include all mental health impairments. I was a special ed teacher before I came to Jan, so it was like a natural extension for me to move from helping kids with accommodations and modifications in the classroom to help employers understand and provide those same modifications and accommodations in the workplace for adults with disabilities. And so that's pretty much what I can say about myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Lou?
Sure. Lou Orsleen, the relatively new director of the Employer and Workplace Policy team at the Office of Disability Employment Policy. I worked also at the Department of Defense and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion department there, but really spent most of my career as one of the co-directors, co-directed along with Ann Hirsch, the Job Accommodation Network. So, and just to sort of give you a brief description of the Office of Disability Employment Policy too. So what we do is really, we're influencers. We develop and influence evidence-based practices that work to increase the employment of people with disabilities. And we have the 3 employer-facing technical assistance centers. One, of course, being the Job Accommodation Network, the other being AskEarn.org, and then KeatWorks.org as well. And I just wanted to say too that, you know, Amy's story was so interesting because it's a microcosm of really what we're experiencing and what we're hearing right now. So this is going to be a great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Dan.
I would agree with that. And Amy, I describe myself as, in terms of roles, as a father and a husband, because those are sort of top of mind in light of what you all described. Children probably running in at some point. So that's my main role. I also am you can see a psychologist by trade. I don't do clinical work for the firm. I do a lot of work in some of our other areas in workforce and performance management, things of that nature. But I am trained as a psychologist. Prior to Deloitte, I was in the Army. I was an Army psychologist where I did clinical work there, including overseas. So I've had a good opportunity to work with individuals in a clinical sense, and now working for a firm, being able to provide some sort of advisory services to the programs that Amy had mentioned. So really delighted, great to be here, happy to engage in this conversation.
Okay, so let's go to our first question. And I will say that the panel, we kind of all looked at the question together. So these are very good, and I don't like they were not just Amy's brain on these, but let's take kind of a wide view first and consider overall issues about work involving mental health and the increased anxiety and depression that's coming up as a result of the pandemic and the rest of 2020. So statistics show that diagnosis, anxiety, depression, and insomnia and related prescriptions have skyrocketed. And a lot of them are being new prescriptions that are being written. What are you all seeing in your capacity? What's your reaction to this? Maybe we'll start with Lou on this one.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think first of all, it's important for us all to recognize there's still a great deal of stigma and bias that persist in workplaces in terms of mental health conditions. And that's what we're all working on here, right? I mean, that's really important. And COVID has really created new challenges and put us at the test, because a lot of folks who really were either stable in their mental health conditions or really didn't have a mental health condition are being stressed to the point where there's recognition that they may have a mental health condition. So this COVID situation is really challenging us all. We're very hopeful because, for instance, hearing the Deloitte evolution just over the past year or the past 10 months, we're hearing that from a number of corporations. So we're really heartened at the same time as we're challenged, because we do understand that there are great models being developed very quickly, and that those are promising to replicate other places. Now, in terms of the data, I mean, we're really looking at the CDC statistics and building upon what Amy said. We're looking, if I look at the report, we're seeing a threefold increase in anxiety disorder, a fourfold increase in depressive disorder. And this is a survey from April through June of 2020 as compared to the same period in 2019. And in particular, you spoke, Amy, of the social justice and the sort of the intersectionality of race, disability, COVID, and what's going on. And there too, we're really looking to the CDC, and we're trying to look at policies, and there's so much need out there. So what are we going to focus on? And looking at the CDC report, it reads mental health conditions disproportionately affect young people, Hispanic people, Black people, essential workers, unpaid caregivers of adults, and those receiving treatment for pre-existing conditions. So that's what we're thinking about in terms of where the primary focus is going to be on policies that we're going to develop at the moment. So
helpful, Lou. And so Melanie, what do you have to add to Lou? What are you seeing maybe your clients coming to you and talking about?
Well, I want to just affirm what Lou said about people who may have been managing, may have had mental health impairments, but were able to manage that themselves, no problem on the job, or finding out that they can't do that. There's way too much chaos going on, way too much stress. And then we've also seen where people who were had disclosed on the job and had asked for accommodations and were receiving those, maybe now that those accommodations just aren't enough, or they need additional accommodations or a change in accommodations because of COVID and the stress that it's brought on. We talk to whoever calls, but we get a lot of calls from in context. I say calls, we're not taking as many phone calls right now because we're working from home. So I should be saying contacts, but you can imagine how all of us feel anxious and how I feel like anxiety's just kind of run rampant during this time. So for people who have an anxiety disorder, that's really been exacerbated. For people with phobia and OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, we've seen how that's been exacerbated as well for, fear of germs and fear of contracting the disease and being out in public. And so going to work, being at work. And so we've seen a lot of issues with people who have difficulty that's related to their mental health, with concentration, memory, increased fatigue, irritability on the job, and that's increased. We've talked to people who are working from home and maybe they're feeling lonely. People are apprehensive. We don't know where the future's going. We don't know how it's going to affect us. And I think people are frustrated. But one of the biggest things is the change and how quickly it happened. And I don't think that too many of us like change. But for people with mental health impairments, change can be really difficult, and especially when it happened that quickly and without warning. And so we're finding a lot of people kind of just with a real urgency to have things change at work and need accommodations. And a lot of information that we give out lately has been about how to disclose a disability for those people, like Lou mentioned, who maybe had a disability, who weren't really needing accommodations at work or needing to disclose that. Now they're needing to ask for an accommodation. And so we've been doing a lot of work with talking about disclosure. How do you do that? How do you ask for accommodations? When's the best time to do that? How to do that?
Yeah, we accommodations are something that we talk a lot about at Deloitte. Dan, any closing thoughts on that topic?
I think just to dig a little deeper, because we're hearing these stats around anxiety and depression. We've certainly seen it here as well. It's important, I think, to contextualize, like, why has this been so profound? I think one area is as we look at sort of pre-COVID workforce needs. We had a large human capital trend survey that we sent out. It was really interesting. The two things that we found that people wanted pre-COVID were a sense of well-being and a sense of belongingness. So people were desired to be connected and have their well-being taken care of pre-COVID. And then COVID hits. And there's almost a magnifying glass on those two. Mm-hmm. And we add on top of that, we're seeing, at least some of the stats say, Americans are working 40% more than they were pre-COVID. So we're talking 3 more hours a day. And this has a compounding effect in maybe what's driving some of these things that we're seeing. And I would highlight, personally, we've talked to probably thousands of people in our firm. And I'm going to grossly overgeneralize, but we see generally an anxiety kind of spectrum with stress and with, feeling overwhelmed on one side. And then there's kind of the loneliness, sort of sadness, depression, isolation on the other. In kind of in two camps. So the anxiety piece, we see that with people who are managing multiple roles, children being one of them, teaching at home and being a worker and having multiple things is compounding that. And then folks maybe who are alone, who don't have their parents or they're living alone, it's sort of compounded by that. So we're seeing a spectrum of things. It's interesting to think through that notion of belongingness and connectedness, almost being exacerbated, right, by this. Amy, you had mentioned these compounding effects of change happening literally on a Friday. So lots of things that we're seeing, but there is hope, I believe. There are things that we can do, which I know we'll discuss a little more later.
Yeah, it's important to remember there's hope because, now we're heading into the winter and the holidays, which are sometimes hard for folks who have anxiety and depression anyway. So we're getting ready to layer some other nuances on this situation. So, we got to keep focused on it. All right, let's move to our second question. And Melanie, I'll start with you on this one. So the term, the psychology of telework, is something that folks are talking about now in response to the pandemic, because so many more folks are teleworking than before. So statistics show that there's an estimated 67% of employees who are working from home. When you think about professionals with mental health considerations, like what are the upsides and downsides of telework and Zoom? So much Zoom, Melanie.
So much Zoom, right?
So
And
much
sometimes,
Zoom.
there's been what they've called a Zoom overload because people have just had too much technology, too much Zoom. I think that there are a lot of good pros and cons with telework anyway, but I think during COVID it makes it just a lot more obvious. People with mental health impairments, for the most part, who have asked to telework, who we've talked about telework, you know, they're having a lot of difficulty with concentration, with being able to focus, and at home, for the most part, people can control their environments. You know, they don't have interruptions from coworkers. Maybe they can control the noise, they can control the lighting, in-person interruptions, you know, those kind of things that in the office they weren't able to do. And if they can increase their concentration and focus, then their productivity can increase as well. So a lot of people thrive in a telework situation where they're at home. For others who may live by themselves, they may feel more isolated, they feel not supported, and they might feel lonely. And one of the really good points of telework, I think, has been flexibility that employees might feel at home that they didn't have in the office. They have that flexibility to help balance their lives, like with their kids home. They're trying to improve their self-care. They're trying to work with their kids on schoolwork and just managing their kids, babysitting their kids, if we want to say that, you know, while the schools are shut down. For some people, it's a lengthy commute. You know, there are a lot of individuals with mental health impairments that have difficulty with commuting and travel and driving. And it's just put an end to that for a lot of people. And so you think about that if you don't have to get up and be thinking about that drive and getting anxious about that drive, and then actually being in that drive and spending 30, 40 minutes. I mean, we talk to people sometimes who drive an hour to work. And if you're stressed for an hour, that takes a lot out of your day before you even get to work. And so I think that if people can reduce that stress before they even start to work, makes me think of, there's a commercial on TV and it shows a woman sitting on her couch watching TV, and she puts her remote down and then she moves to the other side of the couch and she picks up her laptop. And I think that's an excellent commute for people who do have difficulty with travel. Gives them way much more energy. They can be a lot more effective. They can be a lot more productive. And we've heard from employers who are saying they didn't agree with telework. They weren't sure how telework would really work because they like people in the office. And they're finding that people are way more productive at home, and they're finding that it reduces their costs. And they're thinking, hey, you know, this might be something that we can be able to provide, you know, to people in the long run, even when this is over. But then there's also the opposite of that, where there are people we found who cannot work from home. They don't have the ability to concentrate and focus in their own home. There's too much going on. Their spouse may be home, their kids may be home. They don't have a dedicated office, so they don't have that quiet, uninterrupted space. And so they've been trying to work out with their employer a way to go back, even during those stay-at-home orders. You know, and employers are thinking, how do we get these employees, a few employees, to go back and be safe and alternate the work schedule so too many people aren't there at one time. So there are a lot of pros and cons.
Yep. Thanks for that, Melanie. My psychiatrist and she calls it COVID success stories. Like a big part of my job pre-pandemic was social events, like after work. Like as a inclusion leader, I was always doing resource group events or taking people to dinner. And with my anxiety, like that is not what gives me energy. And like not having to do that right now is what I would call a COVID success story. So I know that I'm thankful for some of the change. Lou, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of work from home?
Yeah, well, you know, I see a lot of cons because, you know, what I have seen is that building on this idea of Dan, of belonging, a lot of people are being excluded. We know that a number of virtual tools are not accessible, digitally accessible for people with disabilities. You know, people who are hard of hearing or deaf, if they don't have captions, then they virtually are locked out of a meeting or a training. People who are blind, if they are not able to, if there's not good audio description of graphics or of, topic papers that are being discussed, then that's a challenge for them and creates a lot of additional stress. So, I think that there's just a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress that comes with teleworking. And, I think there's another level of that as well. There's also, even if I do not have an existing disability, I myself, and I'm sure that there are others, I'm a 60-year-old man being challenged technologically to be a technician that I'm not. And I am just expected to do all sorts of things that I never had responsibility to do or were never trained to do. And again, I think it's the suddenness of it as well, is that it's just sort of foisted upon us very quickly, and assumptions are made that we can do things and focus on things that's very challenging. Now, I would hope the flip side would be that there's a lot more opportunity for people with disabilities, particularly as we see people returning to work and perhaps some positions remaining telework positions, and some companies just deciding to just be telework companies. I would think that there would be more opportunity there. But I think that is something that we will see as the recovery begins, and as we see hiring continue, and as we see more people returning to work.
Thank you for that. So Dan, what about like the psychological impacts of never seeing people in 3D? Like, is it good? Is it bad? What's happening to us?
Both. I would say that, in my opinion, and I'll answer that question, the pro is also the con, and that is that we are connected. So you're right, we're behind this sort of sterile screen on one hand, and that's challenging. But on the other hand, it can humanize our workforce a bit. I'm able to see in your living room. I'm able to talk to senior leaders all over the country. People on this call are probably able to access people in their workforce that they never have before, and see them kind of as a normal person who we wouldn't have seen otherwise. We're able to get more done. We're able to be more innovative and creative in how and where and when we do work, which may not have happened without this. However, here's where I have a strong opinion. We're more connected. That's a con. This has being connected with technology has an addictive quality to it. It's not a mystery, I don't think. And particularly with people with pre-existing mental health conditions, that can be really challenging. The more that we use, the harder that we break away. And I cited that we're on computers maybe 3 more hours a day, on cell phones more often than we have before. And these are engineered to kind of keep us on these devices. And that can actually impact our wellness and our well-being. So we know without intentional, I call them technology speed bumps in place, it can incur an impact to our well-being. Like as humans, we make different decisions when we pause and consider versus when we react immediately. Again, not a mystery, but it's challenging when we have all of these multimedia sources coming in. Plenty of research to say that when we're focused and when we're present, our performance is better, relationships are better, mood is better, attention is better. Even there's studies out there that having a cell phone on the desk when you're talking with someone can reduce the quality of interactions. So the question is like, what can we do about it when we're in a system where we kind of have to be engaged all the time? So intentional computer breaks, or I think Amy had mentioned, blocking off certain times in our calendar where we can literally get away. I mean, I'm a proponent for mindfulness activities that, getting outside without your phone and just sort of paying attention to what you hear, what you see, and kind of noticing how your mood shifts. Those type of speed bumps can help with that downside, which I think if we don't moderate that, sort of the use and interaction with technology, it can continue to have an impact on our well-being. So that is a big concern for mine, that sort of the downside of connection.
Thanks for that.
Mhm.
Okay, so connection, Dan, you're giving me a great segue to the next question. So what about communication needs between the employer and the employee? Particularly now that we aren't face to face, we can't see each other. And so how can employers improve their communication in the environment that we're in, and maintain that connection and that sense of belonging? Dan, I'll start with you on this because you kind of talked about that at the beginning, and then we'll circle back with Lou and Melanie.
Yeah, and I don't want to eat my words here because I'm going to say frequency of communication is important. So we need to be communicating a lot, but it has to be tactical and helpful. Because if we recall back, what are the drivers of this? And it's that sense of being isolated, not belonging, having anxiety and loneliness. So connection is needed. But are there tactical ways that we can connect without just sort of talking all the time? Many of us have thought through so I'll be super practical here. What are practical things that we can do to help others feel connected and engaged? One thing that we found is helpful is to think of a small cohort of people to focus on. If you are a leader and have multiple, put 1 or 2 people that you can really focus mentoring on, engaging with them on a more consistent basis, providing coaching along the way. Because it's overwhelming when I need to connect with 50 people, but if it's 3 or 4 people that I can really invest in, or even with this sort of multimedia that we're dealing with, things will happen. Children will run in, and I think as leaders, and we need to sort of normalize that experience and kind of go along with it in many ways. And even, when I'm talking to someone in person in an office, there are lots of visual cues that we have to help that conversation. So on Zoom, it's helpful to go to different rooms, change up your background, sort of have different things that can be discussed. Because again, the spirit of what I'm trying to get across is the humanizing the workforce, not talking too much, but really sort of investing in people. How do we motivate staff? Financial rewards are great, but actually one of the best ways to motivate young staff is recognition. And it's very simple to do on a call, is to use someone's name, say what they did, what the impact was. And that can, again, there's some research that would say that's more important to younger folks than monetary incentives. So doing that, or even calling people out in an email, can be incredibly impactful. So I would say, yeah, frequency and sort of the trajectory of the communication that needs to be targeted, and then having a few specific things that we can do to really invest and engage in our people.
Thank you for that. Lou, thoughts on how communication needs change with teleworking?
Sure. And just building upon what Dan's saying, looking for more opportunities, right, to talk to people and do check-ins with people. So, as a leader on the employer team, we do one-on-one check-ins weekly. And then when we do our team meeting, we used to exchange pleasantries before we started the call. And now, if pleasantries go on and I ask about somebody's kids and stories go on for the first 10 minutes, I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine. And always point blank asking people how they're doing. Is there any support? And starting off that way too. Is there any support that we can provide to you? What's going on in terms of family-wise? So if they're thinking about they need flexible schedule or something's going on and they're reluctant to talk about that, let's talk about it. Bring it up and let's talk about it. Our deputy assistant secretary in our office, I think she's very creative and has adapted a lot of best practices that we're seeing as well. We have a coffee break which is specifically designed, could be midday, could be at the end of the day, where we all just together and talk, certainly not about work, but just talk about what's going on in our lives and kind of reconnect that way. We've done birthday parties, teams birthday parties, where you put up different backgrounds and everybody kind of joins in the fun. And actually they're kind of fun, and it's very, very different, but they are fun. If we've hit a milestone, we'll have a milestone party. So there's just a number of very mindful, kind of thoughtful things, but I think you have to be very intentional about your communications. That's the main thing. You can't just let them happen, because these things aren't going to just happen. You have to be intentional, and you have to bring people together. And I think also in group, as well as individually as well, for those check-ins. Because you really don't know the struggles that people are having in their lives until you really talk one-on-one and you really see what's going on with them. So those are just some of the things that I think our office and certainly our team have been adapting, and those are just techniques that we've been hearing from other organizations.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that it didn't hit me until we were, several weeks in to this, that there's no, like I saw them in the hallway, or, we're on the same bathroom break schedule today. So I keep passing people who I office next to. Now it's like, if you want to talk to someone, you have to put time on calendar, which can, is a good thing. It's good to be intentional, but I also think that sometimes that can, seem more formal than you want it to seem. So it's a really fine balance. So Melanie, given your focus in cognitive and neurological aspects of this, any things that have to be considered, given that we are communicating over Zoom, over email, picking up on facial cues and different things like that could be different, anything that you're coaching people on in that regard?
Absolutely. And one of the big things for people is what works for them. And that could be different for different people. And I think it's important for employers, supervisors, whoever, to say, hey, how is this working for you? How can we communicate in a better way? A lot of people like to have things in writing, especially if there's been a change. And that was something I wanted to bring up too, that, I'd mentioned earlier that change is difficult for all of us, but particularly for people with disabilities, and especially cognitive disabilities, mental health impairments. And people want to know, how is this change going to affect me? And so it's good for people to be specific about that and let people know, so that they feel connected to each other, they feel connected to the business, and they know what's going on. I need to know, how's it going to affect me? How's it going to affect my department? Because that can reduce a lot of stress and anxiety when people are informed. And maybe that's in an email part of the way. Let's inform you as soon as possible when we know what's going to happen, we know it's going to change, in an email, so you can go back and read that, and you can go back and reread it a second time. A lot of times people are anxious, they read things, they're not sure they understand, and that way they can go back and make sure, well, I got that, I understand how clear that is. I think another thing we've been hearing is a way for the employees themselves to ask questions. Sometimes, it's like the employers just give out the information. There's not really that communication back and forth. And I like what Lou was saying there about spending more time talking about the kids and finding out, different things. Because I think the employees have questions about work. So much has changed. It happened quickly. I may not be sure I'm doing the full part of my job. Maybe I need to have some help with that, but I don't really know how to ask that question. I don't know where to go with that. And so I think for employers and supervisors to give that, here's the form we're going to use. We're going to have a meeting where it's just question and answer, or people submit questions ahead of time, and then the supervisor takes some time to address those, because I think we're finding a lot of people have the same types of questions. The same things are kind of floating through our minds. But for people with disabilities who have accommodations, communication sometimes is difficult with the supervisor. Sometimes they just need an additional or an alternate type of communication. And it may be different, how we look at different people have different needs, and it's the same way in communication. And maybe for some employees, you can just do a Zoom and say, hey, here's what we're doing. And for other employees, you need to do a Zoom and follow it up, or maybe prepare them ahead of time for, here's the things we're going to talk about. so that you can have your mind wrapped around that and you can be prepared with some comments you want to make. So it's not just, you're being hit with a question they haven't had time to prepare. For a lot of us, that's not really a problem, but for sometimes people with cognitive issues, it's difficult to think on your feet. And if there are a lot of people on a meeting listening, they might not be able to answer questions or really even ask the questions that they need. So I think as much preparation as possible, depending on the individual person, to kind of a case by case basis is really a good way to look at it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, so tomorrow I am going back to my office for the first time since March. I don't even know why. I don't really have a good reason. I have to go take care of something and pack some things up. But re-entry is hard. I say it every Monday. I say it after I come back from vacation. I am not ready to think about re-entry from, what are we, 6-7 months working from home, probably will be several more months given kind of what everybody's talking about. What thoughts, considerations, advice do each of you all have for the return to work, especially for our disabled stakeholders here, and how can we make sure that things are safe and that the accommodations are back in place, we're taking into account mental wellness, all of these different things. So thoughts on how that could be best accomplished. Melanie, I'll come to you first for this one.
Okay. I think employers asking, hey, preparing people, again, I don't want to just keep saying the same thing, but letting people know as soon as possible. Don't call somebody and say, hey, you're going to work tomorrow. If they need to go to work tomorrow, let them know last week or 2 weeks ago or as soon as possible so they can get prepared for that. I think that communication is key, and the employer communicating their plan of safety. I mean, we've seen employers who have had a really good plan, written plan, got that out to everybody, eased a lot of anxiety for people when they are going to be returning. Know what's expected of them, know exactly what they need to do. If they need to wear a mask, if they don't need to wear a mask, they need to stay 6 feet apart. If half the staff's going in, in the morning, then half the staff's going in the afternoons, all of those kind of things that are really important. But I think the main thing is for employers to talk to the employees and ask them, hey, what do you need? I think they need to make sure that all employees know how to ask for an accommodation. Just for those who've never done it before, here's the process. If there's anything that you need in order to go back, let us know. We'll talk about that. The EEOC says that employers can expect to have medical documentation when someone asks for an accommodation. And even in a pandemic situation, they can do that. But maybe that's not going to be possible. The way things are, maybe people can't get to see their doctor. Maybe they can't get the needed medical documentation. Talk to people. Say, hey, we want to help you out. What do you need? Let's try to provide that. Employers can provide temporary accommodations, trial accommodations to see how they work until they would get that medical documentation. Different people have different levels of feeling safe. I mean, we see it all the time. We see people walking around with no masks and seemingly doing crazy, risky things, and other people who aren't even leaving their homes because they're not wanting to take any kind of a risk. One of the main things we saw, let me just talk about this for a minute, were masks. How many individuals with disabilities were not able to wear masks, and how many conversations we had about that. What are the options and how that changed? One in particular, the person was allowed had a phobia and was allowed not to wear a mask to work, and then was called on a Sunday night and said, hey, the guidelines changed. You're going to have to wear a mask tomorrow. You can't come to work. And that person was just really upset that it had changed that quickly. And that's where I think it's important for employers to keep people informed, because things have changed quickly. That word, our governor uses the word pivot a lot, but I think that's become one of those words for 2020, is we have had to pivot because we believed one thing and then they found out something else, and different things have changed. And so employers need to be able to pivot. Employees need to be able to pivot, but I think letting the employees know what's going on, having that plan of safety that's known to everybody, and allowing people to question that too, if they have issues, fears, uncertainties about returning to work.
Yeah, so Dan, how can we, like, is there a stepwise process we should be guiding employees through to get their heads around, like having to come to the office? Like, how would you advise us on this?
I mean, it's a great question, Amy, and I think you said it's complex, it's challenging. I loved what Melanie said, and I would just double down on that. But Amy, to your question, like, how can we frame that? I'd probably frame that all through the lens of risk tolerance. And what do I mean by that? So let's think about our own risk tolerance, about our family's risk tolerance, and then our organization. So some things that we can think through. So like personally, what are my own health, safety, and mental health well-being needs? I personally may have a pre-existing medical condition, let's say, that could be at greater risk for infection. And that I'm going to be on one side of that risk tolerance spectrum. There may be another person whose well-being needs are to be connected, socially connected, and their risk tolerance they have much higher tolerance. So I have to drive this home as a psychologist that we have to be aware of where our own limitations are first, and then think through other limitations like engagement limitations. I may have, like us here in Colorado, we have hybrid school models. So my kids are home a few days a week, and it's going to be challenging to be able to go back full time into a workforce. So these are things that I and our organizations need to think through as we begin integrating back in the workforce. As Melanie had said as well, like, what about PPE and masks, and like, what's the policy that an organization will create around that? Or will they provide this? Or workforce configurations, things to think through.
Mhm.
How many, like even riding an elevator. I don't know if any of you have been on one lately, but it's different.
Mm-mm.
There are much more limitations on how we're going to do that. So I think if we just sort of say, hey, tomorrow we're all coming in without considering some of these things, it could be a bit very challenging. Even a triage, if there is an outbreak, what do we do? What's our responsibility as a business, and how do we work with contact tracing and things of that nature? So I would say, in terms of a process, think through, how much risk are we as an organization willing to take? How much am I willing to take as well? And I think those are the considerations that we need to start hashing through as we're moving back into what normal may look like in the next few months.
Thanks, Dan. Lou, like, how are you all advising folks from a policy perspective on this? Thoughts on things?
Well, I think that the questions people are asking are really related to the intersectionality of ADA, the CDC's advice, OSHA's advice. And I think that the big picture is that there is no conflict between what CDC is saying and OSHA is saying and what the ADA says. There's no interference. So I think that's the most important thing. It's still individualized assessment in terms of accommodations. So you take all of those things into consideration, and you still have the responsibility to provide an accommodation. And even if you have objective evidence that there is an undue hardship, too costly or too disruptive, then you still have the responsibility to look further to see if perhaps telework or another type of accommodation works. So none of that has changed. Okay, I think there's three big issues that come up with this. And one is, and Melanie already has touched on it, but I'll just cover it just a little bit more. In terms of medical inquiries, many people are at home. They're fearful of going to the doctors. They're not technologically advanced, so they are not able to use a number of tools that perhaps many other people use. So they're not able to get the medical documentation. So it's important that what we're saying, the EEOC is saying, and others are saying, is that forego that medical information. In the first place, it's not required by the ADA, but might be required by your policy, and to reconsider that, right? If somebody communicates to you that they're having an issue. So, just think about a disclosure, right? Medical condition, problem at work. If those two show up in the conversation, then you want to move forward with the interactive process. And you may do so without that medical information. And you can certainly get that later after we're post-COVID, right? And to reconsider the accommodation. So as Melanie said, a temporary accommodation pending more information. I think it's also important to know that for businesses not to be paternalistic, right? Without objective evidence, you can't exclude an individual with a disability and presume that because they have a certain disability, they're immunocompromised, that you're going to exclude them and you're just it's okay, you don't need to come back to work. That too is really not on. You can't do that. It has to be an individualized assessment. And you really have to figure out what that person meets that person's needs and how they can be most effective at work. And it's a negotiation between both parties, right? So that's really important as well. And then again, just the focus of reasonable accommodations, the interactive process, bar, undue hardship on the organization. So those are really the major considerations. And I think the other consideration, which we've kind of spoke of already too, is, what is the plan for PPE, and thinking that through, as Melanie's saying, to present that in advance so people can anticipate. And I think that's something the employers always find challenging. But the thing is, it's a benefit to do that advanced planning and that advanced communications. Because what you don't want to happen is a bunch of people show up at the office and you have to make these quick decisions in a high risk environment, right? That puts you in a very bad situation. So if employers can just step back for a minute and be very, very cognizant and very, very mindful of their planning and their communications to their employees, I think really that's the best advice.
Thank you for that advice, Lou. So if you three are willing, we've had some questions come in through the chat from the audience. And for those of you on the call, if you have questions, you can send them in through the Q&A function here in Zoom, and I will try to triage them. But I want to ask a couple of these. So we talked a lot about anxiety and depression and mental health in that context. Is there anything we want to acknowledge or call out separately about neurodiversity, so ADHD, dyslexia, that would be any different than what we've already said? I just want to make sure we hit that finer point, as it was asked by one of the audience members.
Yeah, I can start out with that. Absolutely. I think with a lot of individuals with ADHD, they try to, for the most part, and I'm basing what I say on the calls we get from employers and employees alike, they try to set themselves up in an environment where it works for them, and they put a lot into that, and that changed. They were sent home and they weren't prepared for that, or their job has changed because now they can't do some of the functions of their job they were doing before. They need to do them in a different way. And it's not easy for them to be able to change that. There's a lot of social skills issues that maybe the technology does not help with. We talked about that earlier. And so I think too, sometimes people have coworkers who work as a mentor with them. They're right there beside of them. They've been alongside them. They can go to them for questions, or if they have something they don't understand. It's very supportive. And now you're at home, you don't have that. And yes, you can call somebody, but it's not quite the same thing. So I think there's a lot to that. People with learning disabilities trying to do things at home without the accommodations they had in the office. Maybe some of the assistive technology that they had that helped them in order to be able to comprehend things better, to read things better, so that they could listen. They don't have those at home. So it's making their jobs a lot more difficult, and they don't know what to do about it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider around those disabilities too.
Thanks for that.
Can I just say something as well?
Please.
I think too, it's really important that, for years I've been talking to employers about having a good accommodation tracking system. And I think that it's imperative right now, because if I was good to focus my one-on-one conversations and my check-ins, then who would I be checking in with? I would want to have a list of my employees who currently have accommodations. And I want to have that one-on-one with them. And when we have that one-on-one, I want to very specifically talk about whether it's still effective and working for them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what gets in the way is we understand that all of this information about accommodations needs to be kept separate. The personnel file needs to be kept confidential. But sometimes there's this going overboard in terms of people not understanding as need to know basis. If I am your employee, if I'm your supervisor or manager and I'm supporting you, then I do need to know those accommodations, and I need to know very specifically how those work, so that when I do my check-in with you, that I can be kind of focused in my approach in supporting you. So I think that's really important for employers, for managers, supervisors to hear.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing about neurodiversity and anxiety and depression. And I hear that does get a lot of attention. Again, it's because that's the most kind of ubiquitous thing that we're seeing. However, I think it's really important to focus on those other things as well, to have a channel, have a voice. I say this about mental illness, that we do a lot around mental health, which is great. But there's always that notion of like, what does mental illness mean? And if we don't talk about that explicitly, some people may feel that that's not as valued. I do think that is similar for other things as well, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, things of that nature, that we can think through things to do to bring more awareness to those conditions in the workforce. So it's a great question, and it's making me think a little bit about it. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. We have another couple of questions about disclosure or approaching this conversation with people's employers, with coworkers. So Dan, maybe we'll start with you. Any thoughts on how to initiate a conversation where essentially you're disclosing and potentially asking for help, asking for an accommodation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll go back to, it might've been Lou or Melanie had said, like the frequency of communications, like check-ins, having intentional check-ins. So we've been intentional about doing that with leaders, like every couple of weeks, check in. And the reason we do that is to be more comfortable with that person. So I'll share a personal story, is that, I do this as well with people on my teams. And it was over a course of a couple of weeks that someone shared something that we're discussing now, having a mental health related challenge or issue. It wouldn't have been brought up had I not had a relationship with this person and not been communicating with them frequently. I would say it can be more challenging personally. I know I would feel personally challenged to potentially bring up something with a senior leader that I have a relationship with. So I would say investing in those people that you trust, who those people are. If those people are in your sort of food network or in your chain, fantastic. And if not, we're at least fortunate to have, internal, talent relations opportunities where we can speak to someone who's not in our rating system, who's an objective party internal to our organization, who we can talk about, like, what are accommodations? How do I go about doing them? Are there risks associated with that? So I think pairing that sort of safe conversation with that person, right, as well as sort of bouncing ideas off of a trusted advisor that you know well, and it can even be a colleague. It doesn't have to be someone in your chain of command. But that's really why we instituted this more check-in frequently, is to sort of reduce the curtain that is around leadership so we can have these kind of conversations.
Lou, Melanie, thoughts on how to have a brave conversation with folks, especially when you're over Zoom and maybe you haven't met them before?
Very good.
Yeah, we advise people to put things in writing. If you're going to do it in person, that's fine, because under the ADA, you don't have to put it in writing. You can just say, hey, I'm having difficulty getting to work on time or getting started in the mornings because I started taking this new prescription. It's related to a health condition. But following that up in writing, because of that, you get nervous. You don't know that person possibly. You don't know how much you really should be saying. So if you put that in writing, it's a nice little package for the employer supervisor to look at. If you know people who are having difficulty, not sure what to do, refer them to Jan. That's what we do every day. We talk to people who are now, and a lot of times it's very urgent. They need to do it quickly because they've gotten in trouble at work and it has something to do with their disability. So they're wanting to do it as quickly as possible, but they wanted to know the right way to do it. So we can always talk people through that as well. And we have guides on our website to do that as well. People are nervous because they don't know what kind of reaction they're going to get, kind of get fired from this. We'll often tell them to look around, have you noticed how other people might have been received when they ask for an accommodation, or people with disabilities? And so it's important for employers to really consider how do we treat people when they disclose, when they ask for an accommodation. Now, all that information is confidential, as Lou said before, and you can't give that out to anybody, but people see that. They see how somebody who may have been struggling is getting some help, and how the employer responded to that. And it makes people more open to ask for an accommodation when they've seen somebody else have a good experience with that.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what I wanted to say too, is it all has to do with your culture. So the individual really has to assess their culture and see how open and how the culture is towards bringing your whole self to work. And if you're seeing others, like Melanie said, there's a spirit of openness and people really do talk about their mental health challenges, then you feel relatively safe. But perhaps your first step is going to talk to your employee assistance program, somebody there, to get some ideas on how to approach. That may be your first step in requesting an accommodation, talking to somebody at the Job Accommodation Network and getting some coaching from them, which also leads, I think, to one of the most effective accommodations that we found with people with mental health conditions. And really that's mentoring. If you have a really good culture, open culture, then you've probably embraced the idea that if you have someone with a mental health challenge or condition, that one of the best ways really is to find a mentor there in the organization. Again, not in their chain of command, but somebody that is willing, whenever that person is challenged, to have that hard discussion with them. Perhaps, by the nature of mental health conditions, sometimes you don't realize maybe how sharp you're reacting to something or how harshly you've addressed someone. And this mentor can help you work through those kinds of issues. One other thing that I want to propose too is that at the Job Accommodation Network, there is called a plan of action form. Jan has a whole suite of forms in terms of accommodations, but this form in particular, if you're going to request an accommodation, I think it's very effective, again, to plan it out. So there is this plan of action form that once you disclose, and certain triggers or certain situations which are particularly challenging for you, then you want to build this plan of action into your accommodations. And perhaps you don't even need any accommodations, but this is a plan of action to anticipate, when you are returning to work from COVID. you might have some challenges there. So what is my backup plan? Wonder if I go to the building and I'm totally freaked out because there's a group of people trying to get in the doors at the same time. But my boss, I have a 10 a.m. meeting that first day with my boss. What's the backup plan? So try to anticipate these situations, create a plan of action, and have it sanctioned by the manager or supervisor in HR. So I get there are too many people to go in through the door. We can't properly social distance. So you know what my plan is? Turn around and go home, right? Tomorrow is another day. That's my plan of action for that day. Anticipate it, plan it, sanction it. That's my suggestion.
I love that. Thank you. So we're at the end of the time for our panel. I'm going to do one closing thought because we talked, I think it was Dan who said, maybe it was Melanie, about hope. And I don't know, it's like, what are we on Tuesday? And maybe we leave this with a hopeful thought. So in light of COVID, and it's sort of forcing us to reimagine the way that we're working, is there something that you've seen emerge as a trend that you think will become more widely adopted or more widely accepted? I think that I'll start and give you all a minute to think, because that was sort of a wild card. But I pre-COVID, so many conversations about the fact that my professionals at Deloitte needed to travel to do their jobs. So they were constantly on the road. So there was a lot of conversation about not just like hours and intensity of our work, but also this idea that people are flying all over the country and it adds a layer of stress. I recognize there's some people who enjoy that and they seek that out. But I am hopeful that we have learned as a firm at Deloitte that it is possible to work from home and be very productive and serve our clients. And we will see an added layer of flexibility, that work from home will become another norm and tool in our toolkit to help people achieve balance in their lives. Dan, Melanie, Lou, who wants to go first?
Oh, I'm happy to go. And I think the hope that I get, Amy, is that there has been a spotlight shined on something that might not have been otherwise. And that's around, again, mental health, especially in the workforce. I've been with this firm 8 years, and the past 8 months, I can't even count the number of engagements like this I've been involved with. So it gives me a lot of hope that we're putting a spotlight on it for especially folks who may feel that we haven't been doing that. It gives me hope that we are in a place where I believe we start curating resiliency in our workforce more than we would have been able to do otherwise. I think we can now, given the challenge associated with this is, someone asked a question, what's the future of this look like? I think we can create, trainings, opportunities with normal people around how to motivate and lead and create resilient teams to be able to fend off, major mental health related issues as they come. I saw that in the military. That's what we drive to sort of create a strong, hardy, resilient workforce. And I believe this has forced us in many ways to invest in mental health and to do something like that. So I am hopeful that the tide will turn with mental health.
Melanie, final thoughts?
I agree with what you said, Amy, about the teleworking, and what we've seen too are all these conferences that we had planned to go and how they turned into virtual conferences and could include so many more people. A lot of people with disabilities don't have the funds to go to a conference in a big city and stay in a big hotel. They can't get there. They don't have a way to get there, don't have a way to finance that. And so they can take part in that. And I think the flexibility that came from being sent home and finding new ways to do things is just, it has helped employers see, oh, wait a minute. I was so rigid in my thinking that, oh, this will never work, this will never work, this will never work, that we didn't even try it. And now we were forced to, and we found, hey, it really did work. And in fact, people are more productive. people are happier because they do have more flexibility. So though I see that as a really big plus.
Yep, thanks. We call that challenging orthodoxies at Deloitte, and I'm here for it. Lou, final words, my friend.
Well, here's what I think. I think that awareness breaks the cycle of and combats stigma. I think it's effective. I think training managers and supervisors is effective. I think providing accommodations is effective. I think, many corporations have great employee assistance programs. We need to gear them more towards people with mental health conditions. There's no doubt about that. And I think we need to look at our return to work programs and make they too are inclusive of people with mental health conditions. And I really think that many corporations, Deloitte certainly included, has the infrastructure to do this. So I think that this crisis can really produce and promote a leapfrog, and we can really go forward realizing that all of these things that we've been putting in place piecemeal, if they're all co-joined, we put them all together, I think they can be incredibly powerful for our organizations and in particular for our employees with mental health conditions. So that's what I would say. I'm very optimistic about this once we get out of the crisis.
Yep. All right. Well, thank each of you for sharing your thoughts. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to close us out.
Okay, thank you so much. And wow, I've just been taking notes. It's a good thing that this is transcribed. So for those of you who have a desire to see this again and again and again, we will be captioning it and providing a transcript. It will be on the DC Metro's YouTube channel, but we'll send out information to all of you who registered so we know how to give you that information. I really want to thank you. This is something that everyone has a personal stake in terms of mental health, and I do too, personally. So it's so helpful to understand some ideas and great work, Deloitte. I mean, I know that none of us are where we want to be in this topic, but I love the sense of belonging. That just really spoke to me. And I know how important communication is and has got to continue. For me, I think that I have that sense of hope too that you spoke about, because I have seen more and more situations, cases where we as humans are coming together and we're helping each other. And we're looking out for our neighbors and our friends and finding out how we can do more. And I think that really is a great thing for us as human beings and for humanity. So I want to take you to take a look, not to the next slide, but these are some resources. And Lou and Melanie called out some of them. There is a mental health toolkit on EARN. And if you're not familiar with EARN, I can tell you that it stands for the Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion. And as Lou mentioned, EARN is one of the I can't think of the name of it, but it's provided for ODEP. ODEP runs the EARN, JAN, and also PEAT, which was mentioned. So there's some great websites up here. You mentioned PEAT, and we didn't put it up there, but I think it's important. That's the Partnership on Employment and Accessibility Technology, because that is a big piece in what we're talking about and making sure that people have accessibility. So there are contact information. And if you just want to go to the last slide with a big thank you so much, and look forward to seeing us in November. We'll be doing a session on veterans. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, please do that so that you can keep on top of all the events that we're going to be hosting. And thank you all, and happy ending.
Thank you.